In part two of Tuesday Talks with Toomey special series, MedBridge Advisors and IDN Directory talked about the importance of building a strategic relationship with the GPO and the IDN contracting managers.
You touched on two things that's important for everyone to understand, right? So relationships are important. And how do you build them? How do you get to them? It's this chicken or egg story always. So you can work with the regional purchasing coalitions, the RPCs, or the aggregation groups. Sometimes they'll do their own contracting within their own entity. And if it's a product that clinically is highly acceptable or desirable, or, if you didn't have a contract, or I should say, if you did have a contract and for some reason you don't have that contract anymore, but maybe that IDN really wants this, the clinicians really believe in your product, then you could write a local, right? And you can do that with them directly. And that gives you some tie back to, hey, we do have a contract. So again, flexibility and knowing your customer, knowing what GPO they are part of, and knowing what they need to navigate if they're going to move away from their contract. So hope I didn't go around too much on that one, but you really could break it down. Are they really compliant? They're not going to deviate. Are they happy to be part of the GPO and they want to stay within the framework? But if you've got a better behavior that you're rewarding, different rebates, maybe, a better tier price plus a rebate, or, other incentives or portfolio incentives, where you can do like an overlay, like an enterprise agreement, right? Then that can help you really build up your, hey, we're going to put some of these products into this overlay, even though they're not on contract. Well, then you start bringing, the category sales. And then when you go back, when the next cycle comes, you've built that base of sales with certain large aggregation groups or large members. And then the GPO recognizes that and says, okay, maybe we can give these guys a shot.
I see. Interesting. So yeah, so partner on the local level to create bigger opportunity up top. And that's great advice. One of the questions I always get, is, obviously there's clinical and non-clinical stakeholders in these processes in many cases. And so my experience is more on the clinical side because my father was a physician for many years. And so I used to ask him, when he was a plastic surgeon, on staff, many years ago, I would ask him like, hey, how much pull did you have in, asking for specific instruments or, obviously every surgeon has their tools of trade that they really adhere to and that they really like, whether they feel a certain way. So, and he would say, you have he goes up to a point, he goes, but it's changing. He goes, it's not always as simple now for clinicians to just kind of talk about what they want and what's important to them. And so a lot of times it's the non-clinical folks that are kind of making these decisions based on, what the hospital needs, the amount of stock that they can get, and obviously the price. And so obviously going into the partnership, into the negotiation, it's good to know about both sides of the aisle. And so, what would you say is really kind of the best way to engage with both the clinical and the non-clinical stakeholders kind of in a situation?
You got to build yourself we'll call it the stakeholders map, right? I can't stress this enough. I mean, if you're doing an in-service, say, think of it the same strategy, right? You've got the approvals, you're doing an in-service. Who is everybody that needs to sign off on this product, or service that you offer to move you closer to the yes? Because it's not just one person, right? There's a charge nurse, there's education, there's someone in materials management. It could be someone environmental. It could be someone, in the OR and the ED. You don't always know, but there's multiple layers that people have to sign off on to move you to the yes. So same concept here is you're trying to figure out how do I engage with the right stakeholders, is even before you get started, right? You should understand how many different areas your service, your technology touches, and who are they? And then who's going to be the ultimate sign off? Who's going to sign the contract? Is supply chain going to sign the contract? Is materials/contracting going to sign the contract? If it's a large aggregation group, do they need to sign the contract and then it filters out from them? Really just got to build your roadmap out and understand everybody that's going to be a decision maker and get as many of them touch points as you can, introduce and divide and conquer. If you and one sales rep, that's fine, right? But set up, say, hey, here's what we're going to introduce. We're on the same page. We have the same message. And then we're going to figure out what the steps would be for them to accept this product or technology into their health system. So, so let me ask you though, because that's an important piece. Is like, all right, that sounds great and sounds easy to do that because the clinicians are the ones that will drive the adoption once things launch. But how do I, the right people to resonate so I get my top down, bottom up approach? So how can IDN Directory, or what have maybe some of your clients have done to really find those influencers that can not just be, in the use of the product, but maybe even outside of whether, maybe someone's not even, maybe they've got satellite offices or surgery centers that are also part of this decision, right? So have you had successes or stories come from your clients that are using, resource tool like yours to help navigate those stakeholders?
To some degree, yes. We are very much focused. We don't really display clinicians too much. Physicians are not part of our makeup, if you will. But what we do have is we may have a chief nursing officer. We may have some sort of a clinical leader. Maybe a medical officer, like a chief medical officer, somebody that's a doctor of some sort, or like a CNO, a chief nursing officer, somebody that's going to make decisions at that higher level for that division, or at least be part of those conversations. Traditionally, my customers don't necessarily go after those folks, but it's good for them to see them, because what I always like to do is I always like to say, hey, be aware. Like I always tell teams, like if you're going into the IDN, take this and copy and paste this sheet or build out a dossier, which we can easily export them out, and have all the names of these people, like almost to a point where like if you hear a name, you're like, oh, that's somebody that's in the org chart. We will put these people many times, like usually at the chief level, in the org chart, because we understand that some clinician leaders may get looped into a conversation, and we want our users or our prospects to understand that those people may be identified in there. So when you see those names, keep a good ear on them, because they may in fact get looped into your conversations. But also another thing we do is that, because we're aiming to try to, be as perfect as we can in the industry, we often, again, will have suppliers that will tell us and say, hey, look, PJ, we had some negotiations with this IDN. We've started talking to many of these people that you've provided us in this org chart, but there's some new names that got looped into the conversation. Would you mind adding these people to your network? We will go out and do it right away. I'll immediately get my team on it, and I'll say, hey, if you could just point me in the right direction. Oh, you want this chief nurse officer that's been looped into your conversations because you're selling caths into the emergency room or whatever it may be. Okay, fantastic. We'll get that person. We'll get their information. We'll locate all their info, and then we'll put them in there for your use at the next time, or for maybe the next person's use that needs it. So we definitely have this kind of white glove ability to get you what you need. Clinicians aren't necessarily our bread and butter, but if they're important in your negotiating or contracting process, we will 100% get them added for you, and we'll move quickly to do it.
No, it's great. I mean, having that kind of great data is so important in general, right? So having live data, having real-time data really is it's a struggle. So how do I lump my accounts together and my targets together and my opportunities together, and being able to have some of those stakeholders, readily available is great.
Well,
great tool.
that's kind of what I would ask you, because you had some great content last week, or maybe the week before, that we were talking about analytics on in LinkedIn. I would ask you that question because, we do live in a world of analytics, but there's a ton of analytics out there. And so, how do you think really vendors can use good analytics and analysis to kind of show performance and value?
Well, if you can, when you're having your meetings at the IDN level and even up to the GPO level, right? You want to know what kind of spend you have. I mean, that's the biggest one in the first one, right? Where's your spend? What facilities are using it? And even down to what department are using it, and how can you share that with the right audience? When I would do QBRs and different, whether it's the GPO or the IDN, I would always show, okay, here's the health system sales, or here's the total contract sales. And then I would break it down into, let's just use an IDN as an example, right? So if the IDN has 10 facilities, I would show them our total sales for each of our categories of products, each of our contracts. And then I would go down a layer. I would show them which facilities are using each of the products, and the contracts, right? So what that we're trying to break that down is not just, and I'll just use, I live in Maryland, so University of Maryland is my, example. I'm not just going to show them just University of Maryland's spend on X product, but then I'll break it down by each one of the facilities and even the satellite facilities that I have it to show them, hey, I know that our sales are going to each one of these entities that are part of University of Maryland. And what that does is we've created a baseline right up front, because I want to know where my opportunity of growth is. And that's why we're here, right? To grow our sales. So if we're getting a contract, we've already established a good baseline. And then I can use that to show that every time is, hey, last time now we've shown X% growth. We've had 5% growth in this facility, 10% in this facility, but that one main facility still is not moving. They're still not using our products, which is part of this contract. So how do we get engagement? How do I get, the right people involved, the right stakeholders of that one facility to get us to that larger number we're trying to capture from the entire, IDN. But what's really nice is they also use that same model back to the GPO. I'll take that same information and use it on my, the top GPO members of that group, and say, here's where we're performing in our contracts. Here's where our biggest IDN sales are as in a health system. But then even individually, we're seeing some pockets of hospitals not buying, and we could use your support to grow these, entities within, right? How can I get more engagement from the local level? Things like that, right? Those are good questions that we use too. So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it, I would say, is market share, right? If I have an ability to understand what my additional market share is in a rep's region, in an entire, rep's territory or entire sales region, or within that contract, then I could build that basis of, okay, I just won this contract. I think I have 10 or 15% of the market share within this contract. How am I going to accelerate that? Well, then you can start building your target tool around which of the areas have richer upside, better opportunities. Where do you have a strong current existing platform with maybe other products or services? How do I build off of that? And then I could structure and put my IDN team where I want them, right, strategically, and say, we really need to grow in these couple areas. So let's put them on the right spots versus just putting them out there blanket and saying, hey, you've got the whole East Coast, good luck. Let's put them where I can use that information. So using that data, right, and using the analytics from what I do have, and then other resources I can pull in, whether it's from the GPO, whether it's from a distributor, whether it's like from a source like you as an IDN Directory, then I can really build out a strategic mindset with my sales team of, we're going to deploy this out, exactly where we want to go, and we know the focus accounts that we want to strategize with.
Yep. No, that's great advice. And I think that's exactly the process that sales teams should be kind of adhering to, because it's definitely, there's many ways to skin a cat, as they say, but the real truth of it is that it's, you have to be organized. It's good to have some tools that are available to you. And also, it's good to have some good reporting and some good analysis pieces that can help you kind of clearly identify, like you said, those spends and those kind of smell tests that help you, identify that this is going to be a ripe target, if you will. So Dan, since we're talking about, we've been talking about contracting, we've been talking about, getting yourself set up properly, access tools, fairness. I'm going to use that word right now. That's a big word in the industry. And what I'm going to tie it to is contracting. And so I would ask you, any tips you could possibly offer vendors for negotiating fair contract terms? And I'll be specific how I say that.
I will say this, and I've seen it happen too many times. If you want your first contract, you kind of almost do anything to get it, right? So my biggest statement without, overstepping boundaries is don't negotiate out desperation. Everybody wants a GPO contract because they feel like it's the door opener that they need to accelerate sales. But if you're only doing it that piece of paper, you're already in the wrong strategy, right? So really, really understanding what it is that you want out of the GPO, what expectations you have from them, and what growth expectations you have, so that you kind of set those standards. So that's the biggest part of it, right? You're gonna lead clinically, and you're gonna lead with your value prop, and whatever that cost of conversion can be. So you can negotiate terms within your contract. If you have that data, you know where your growth opportunities are, you know what kind of savings you believe you can bring to the table, whether you've got cost calculators or you kind of know the size of the prize already, a couple of the IDNs, and you've done the math of usage, right? You can use that as good, strong information to negotiate the GPO. Look, everybody wants dollars in savings, and sometimes that's really hard to give too much in savings. So maybe you have a tier structure that you're comfortable with, but you have growth rebates. You have something the first 90 days or 120 days of the contract where you'll pay on growth, or growth at the end of the year. Right? There's different ways that you can do those kind of things. But what I also say is, if you have a really good, strong value prop and a really good opportunity to reduce cost, what I call downstream. So not just in the dollars and pennies, but operational costs, or less readmittance, or less, infection sites or skin breakdown. All of those things have a tremendous savings or cost to the health systems. Things you could also do to try to help yourself out is negotiate terms like free shipping, maybe on like certain dollar values and up, you'll do free shipping. Net 30 versus net 45 or net 60. Never get caught to like a next net 90. Right? If you don't need to, do that, but you can negotiate that. Early pay. Sometimes it's beneficial to give that extra 1% if someone pays in the first, 15 days, 10 days, but a lot of times they don't. But that's a 1% that you've got to put into the total cost of your contract. So little things like that you could pull out to help. Maybe I need to get to this dollar to make my contract look better, but I'm going to need to pull out some of these other things that I can't live with administratively or operationally, because then I just can't survive. You can't have both. But it's okay to have those conversations. And I think a lot of times, if you don't have enough good data or you're not really prepared, you look at the contract and say, yep, sounds good. I want this. Let's go. And then a couple months later, maybe your sales aren't accelerating, but you're also paying more than you thought you were because you didn't look at it from an operational standpoint.
That's great advice. Gosh. And then definitely a good reminder to always look very closely at the at what you're doing. So that's very, very good information. And so this would kind of bring me to kind of the time where we are today. And, obviously we're in a different world today than we were 2 years ago. And it seems like we're continuing to move into different days every day going forward. And so what I would ask you is, knowing all that you know about contracting and also the time that you've spent in the industry and you've seen things come and go and change, what do you think are some of the biggest contracting challenges that vendors are facing currently? And as a second part, are going to face down the road? And it may be the same, but I just wanted to kind of ask it as a two-parter.
No, I mean, today, the hottest topic today is tariffs, right? That's one that everyone is absolutely all over for. And I don't have the magic answer there, right? No one does. I mean, just today,
Sure.
this morning, there was another extension with China, and there's still some tariffs, and it's a moving target, right? Will it all go away one day? Will it all come crumbling down? We just don't know. But what you can do is I go back to transparency and talk to your customer, talk to your GPO, let them know what you're concerned about. And if things were to happen, what would happen to you, right? If a 20 or 30% price hike came because of tariffs, that might put a company out of business, right? They might put them in the red where they only have one or two products and they can't survive. But if you negotiate, if you talk through it now, the GPO will talk back with you and say, hey, here's what our options could be. Maybe there's some operational things like we just talked about that you could pull back. They don't like to change midterm contracts. No one does. But if you're having conversations and you're transparent around what is and what's possible, what could cripple you, nobody wants to see a product fall out of the market either, because then that's a restructure of everything. But if you just come in and say, listen, I don't care, we're going to have to do this 8% or we're canceling our contract, they're not going to work with you, right? You're not building a partnership there. You're just saying what you got to do and moving on. So there's a lot of talking back and forth that has to happen. And that can be on border taxes. That can be on container costs. That's, I'll tell a quick story. This was really during COVID, where costs were all over the place and containers are going up. And I was sitting at I was at a conference. So I was sitting by myself at a table one day, and there was a gentleman next to me who had to be a doctor, and he was at a different conference at the same hotel. But we start talking about like the cost of rising materials and the cost of labor and labor shortages and back orders and all these. And he was like, you're a manufacturer. He's like, I don't understand it. How can someone walk in the door and tell me they're going to raise my price 20%? And I said, well, I agree. That's very frustrating. I said, let me ask you this. Did you ask them why? Show me where the 20% is coming from. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, look, if I were you, I'd go back and say, listen, I'll work with you, but you got to show me where your increases are too. And when I was, managing some IDNs, I went in with a slide deck that our company put together and said, here's what our container costs. Here's what our labor rates went up in each of our countries. Here's where, taxes have been hit on us, and this is where it went up. And it equal to 35% price increase. And I'm only asking for 3, right? So it's like, look at what I'm taking on and look what I need just to make sure that I can stay in a safe spot so that I can give you a reliable product. I can keep my supply chain, at a good, decent amount on the shelf so you don't go in the back order, right? And I can keep our doors open. Conversation, he was like, wow, I've never even thought I could ask a vendor that. I was like, you should both ways. It should be transparent. And that really allows you to get over some of these hurdles that we're facing today. So long-winded answer, but obviously, you hit something like tariffs. When tariffs go away, there's going to be another one. There's going to be something else in the future, right? We thought for COVID, we think we were through that. Look how many different things have happened since COVID. Really just knowing what you've got, is your own stuff, your own transparencies, making sure your leadership's on board with sharing the stuff so you can sit down and have a very open-minded business conversation. But also remember, and we didn't really talk much about it here in some of these conversations today, but remember that the end result is the patient. We've got to make sure the product's getting there. We got to make sure that decisions are being made that benefit the best of the healthcare for our patients, look, ourselves, because we're all going to be there one day. And just having that now, just thinking about that mindset when any of these new waves come up, that to me is one of the biggest, I think, things we can do differently to overcome these challenges.
Wow. I mean, that's first off, I love the approach of being able to, ask about where those savings are coming from. And I think what it does is it still keeps the conversation going too, without having somebody say, hey, look, I need that 8% increase and it's rain or die, right, rain or shine. And I think that, it shows that when vendor side and provider side are willing to work together and they can find common ground. It may still cost the hospital a little bit more money, but at the end of the day, they can still keep the product adopted. They don't have to go and start writing new contracts, and they can kind of keep doing business as they have been, with, again, the ultimate end goal of keeping those patients, healthy and able to get those supplies for their needs. So, fantastic information here, Dan. I really, really, appreciate it, and hearing kind of all your insights, because I think this is such telling information in today's world today. Business is always changing and business is always evolving, but I think it's so important for people to hear how, common ground needs to be maintained in this space. And, if contracting can't find its way through its issues, the people who suffer the most are going to be those patients, those end users. So I think that, this is just such great information, and I think everybody's going to really enjoy hearing it and hopefully can put it into action.
It's great. Well, PJ, this has been an amazing conversation today. It's amazing how fast time flies. We've touched on so many different topics today, and I really appreciate you coming on to Tuesday Talks with Tumi and talk about IDN Directory, and it's a resource, right? It sounds like it's an amazing resource that suppliers really could use to help navigate contracting, build strategies, and obviously penetrate, a little faster.